continue where we left off last week. We spoke about last week the Issa CHAZARA and exactly how does it help when you make it gar for cotton. We spoke about this two ma'alchim in the Rishonim. Either the Issa CHAZARA is because mechzik mevashel, and when you make it gar for cotton, it's not mechzik mevashel, or the Issa CHAZARA is because of chashash chitui. And we spoke about why CHAZARA is more of a chashash chitui than by Shia, because since you're be metapel, you're handling with the pot, there's a chashash that you might start be mechatel. But if it's gar for cotton, then there's no chashash chitui. That's what we spoke about last week. But it's important to sugi say Gemara, the Aflamat Ches, that there's certain Tnoi CHAZARA that you have to have. And without those Tnoi CHAZARA, it's also. And the Yisara Tnoi CHAZARA is that if we don't have these Tnoim, we'll speak about soon, or Daita Lachsa, then we don't see the original connection that it was on the fire. It's like the Lashon of the Poiskin is Botla Shia Shaina, it's Botla the first Shia, and it's not CHAZARA, it's called Nasin L'Chatchila. So that's the sort of the Tnoi CHAZARA, that whenever you don't have a hemshech of that free bishul, so look at it, you're putting on it L'Chatchila, and that's a problem. So I just want to provide before we get into Tnoi CHAZARA, what is that problem? Why shouldn't Nasin L'Chatchila be worse than CHAZARA? We said two mahachim had to learn CHAZARA, either because of Mexican Vashal, okay, but if it's gar for cotton, it's good. So what's the problem with Lechatchila? We're talking about something that's fully cooked. So why taka can't put on the fire Lechatchila? And weiter, if the chashash is chitui, so we're saying obviously it's gar for cotton is going to help. So why should there be Issa Lechatchila? So premise is three mahalchim had to learn. Either if you learn the Issa CHAZARA is, let's say, Mechzi is also Chash Chitui. We said over some Rishonim before that way. So then the Pshat is very partial. That Enochanami Issa Shi is Chash Chitui. CHAZARA is also Chash Chitui, but it's a more of a Chash Chitui because you're holding it in your hand. You're ready to put it back and you see that it got a little bit cold. Gar for cotton, there's no problem. The problem is in the Chatchila is then it's Mechzik Mevashal because someone's putting something on the fire. The Chatchila starting off on Shabbos, or it was originally there, but it had no connection with the original putting on because you don't have the Tnoi CHAZARA. So then it's Mechzik Mevashal, even though there's no shayla of cooking, like we spoke about last week. Whenever we discuss CHAZARA, there's something that's fully cooked already, but still it's Mechzik Mevashal. That would be one way to learn. That means even though the Issa CHAZARA is as Chash Chitui, but when you don't have the Tnoi of CHAZARA, it bleibt like Nasin L'Chatchila. So Nasin L'Chatchila, then there's a problem Mechzik Mevashal. That would be one mahalach to learn, and that's mafurish in the Shit Laran and the Balamor. Even though they both learn that the Issa CHAZARA is because of Chash Chitui, but when you don't have the Tnoi CHAZARA, it bleibt Nasin L'Chatchila, and then there's a problem of Mechzik Mevashal. And it's avoid that way in the Shulchan HaRav also. Shulchan HaRav and Sift Hezvav, it's avoid clearly that the Yisara Issa CHAZARA is because of a Chash Chitui, like we said over from Taisus and the Balamor, and the Magen Avraham goes that way. But when you're missing the Tnoi CHAZARA, and the Yisara is when you're missing the Tnoi CHAZARA is, it bleibt like in a Nasin L'Chatchila, the Shulchan HaRav explains that the problem is because of Mechzik Mevashal. That's one mahalach to go. The Magen Avraham, we mentioned last week, holds that the Chash CHAZARA is out Chash Chitui, but it's clear in the Magen Avraham, in Sivkot Lamed Gimel, that even the Chash of Nasin L'Chatchila, that's also because of a Chash Chitui. And as I said before, in the Magen Avraham, Bemis in Hilchos Bishul, Shin Yud Ches, Sivkot Chafei, which is very hard to understand. If there's a Chash Chitui. So we explain by Shira, when you make a gar for cotton, it takes care of Chash Chitui. Once it's Kamachem and Soilach Ananya, or Ledrabonon, if it's fully cooked in stomach ground. CHAZARA has an air problem because you're holding the pot, and therefore, even if it's fully cooked, Mistam Virali, it might get cooled off. So you have to have always gar for cotton, okay? But why are you telling me Nasin L'Chatchila, if it's gar for cotton, what should be the problem? It's not Chash Chitui. So how are you going to have to say, truthfully, you have to say that even though it's gar for cotton, but it's only B'tzirif that we see some type of hemshech of the Friedige Bishul. Because then there's a shtickle of a hacker. Well, if someone's putting something like a chila, we're much more worried. You could just want to lake to one age. The Magen Avraham already says, and we spoke about this, the Magen Avraham says Sifkot Meches, that you never really can get at all the the gecholim. That means even though we paskin that you have to be good for kol gecholim, you never could really get at all the gecholim. HaRav, see by Tanner it's also. So Melo, that's why there's still epis v'osach shashchita even when it's garvakotim. And when you're talking about Nesil Lechatchila, there Chazal were much more worried about it because you don't have that hecker that was already on the fire from earlier. That would be the second malach. And the third malach would be, let's say you hold that the Issa CHAZARA is good for because of Mechsig Mevashal. That's the way the Mishnah Berurah learns. So 1 second. So why is Nesil Lechatchila worse? It's weiter Mechsig Mevashal. And by CHAZARA, if it's Mechsig Mevashal, there's a het of garvakotim. So why is Nesil Lechatchila worse? So you have to say that by CHAZARA, it helps garvakotim. The sins, the Maisa is not mamish Mechsig Mevashal and Ganzen. Why? Because the Maisa was on the fire, you're just putting it back. So then the fact it's garvakotim, that takes away from the Mechsig Mevashal. Putting something on the fire, Lechatchila on Shabbos, or when you're missing T'nai CHAZARA, then it's a much darker Mechsig Mevashal idea. It's not going to help, even if it's garvakotim. So Lasaka and Vorm comes out. That we spoke about last week, what the Issa of CHAZARA is. It is Mechsig Mevashal or it's a Chash Chitu. And based on that, can be an Afkamino when you don't have the T'naim of CHAZARA, which means we consider it Nesil Lechatchila, what would be the Issa? If you learn that the Issa of CHAZARA is because of Chash Chitu, like some Vur in the Tais and the Balamar, the Magavam goes, then you could say when it's missing the T'nai CHAZARA or Nesil Lechatchila, then it's about a Mechsig Mevashal. That we said as Eisen Vur in the Shit Laran, in the Balamor, and the Shulchan Aruch HaRav. The Moger Avram is Vur, then even Nesil Lechatchila is a Chash Chitu. Obviously, he's going to have to say that there's a much more of a Chash Chitu by Nesil Lechatchila because we're only makel to be Saimuch when the food was not on the fire, but the food was on the fire, but the food was not on the fire or was on, but it's bottle, the original Shia, because you miss it, that's much worse. And the third malach is if you go to Mishnah Berurah. Mishnah Berurah holds that Issa CHAZARA is because of Mechsig Mevashal, and you have to say when you're missing the T'nai CHAZARA, then it's much more Mechsig Mevashal because you're putting something Lechatchila on the fire. There's no hemshich of the Friedrich Bishul. That we find that garvakotim helps, it takes away a little bit from the Mechsig Mevashal, but not in Ganzen. It only takes away enough that we can see a continuation of the previous Bishul. But if you're starting with Lechatchila, that is not going to help. That's the yesod of the Isser of Nesil Lechatchila. 3 stadim. Either Issa CHAZARA is al Chash Chitu, Nesil Lechatchila is Mechsig Mevashal, or if the Issa of CHAZARA is al Chash Chitu, maybe this is also Chash Chitu, but it's much more of a Chash. Or if the Issa CHAZARA is Mechsig Mevashal, you have to say here it's much more Mechsig Mevashal. These are the 3 ways how to understand the Isser of Nesil Lechatchila. Like we're saying, anytime you're missing the T'nai of CHAZARA, it bleibt like a Nesil Lechatchila. So now I want to discuss the T'naim that you need for CHAZARA. So Eilam Mustama learned the Sugya Daf Lamed Ches. The more brings down the Machoik is which T'naim do you need? One Madama says it has to be Daikal Achser. One Madama says it's Tali if it's Oedi B'Yodai. Maybe you need both. Maybe one is enough. Taidemar has different chakiris there. Let's say Tolam B'Makol, if you put a Gabi Mito, or Safsel, all these cases are considered Oedi B'Yodai. That means Oedi B'Yodai means Mamish in his hand, or the main thing is that you didn't put a Gabi Karka. That means it could be something in between. Karka is something that's Mesulik, that's the place that you put it when you finish with it. And Oedi B'Yodai shows clearly that you want to put it back, and these things are somewhere in between. So we have here the Gemara. The question is how we pass them. So there's 3 shittas in Rishayim, and we'll see these 3 shittas are very important to know these 3 shittas because the halacha you have to work with all 3 shittas. The first sheet is a sheet Rambam. The Rambam paskins that like the Madama that everything is totally on Oedi B'Yodai. If it's Daital Achser or not Daital Achser, that's not a kaveh at all. But the Rambam paskins the kula on all the shilas of the Gemara. Talam B'Michael, Safsel, Mito, all these shilas he passes a kula. According to him, there's one tonight. It can't be nichel kabekaka. You put on a kabekaka, the show is over. Even if it's Daital Achser. If he didn't put it on the karka, even if it's ain't Daital Achser, there's no problem. That's the shittas of the Rambam and all the shilas of Gemara we call the kula. because the Shal Rabban, maybe we go to Kul. So according to the Rambam Shita, everything is totally on one thing. If you put on the karka, it's botlo shia chazara, it's ice, and it's kilo nun the sin lechatchila. If you didn't put a gabi karka, I don't care if you had to put it back or not, it's going to be mutter. And Kediver Rambam, the Mechaber in Reish Nun Gimel Sebeis, Paskins like the Shita of the Rambam, Mechaber says mutter al ziroi, kol man shiva sachas, v'loi hinicha gabi karka. And according to him, like we said, even if you did not have a mind to put it back, but as long as you didn't put on the karka, it's not a problem. Rambam, if you put it on the karka, even if you had a mind to put it back, it doesn't help. And that's before the Mechaber Sev Gimel. The Mechaber says that someone's mashkin boik and he sees that his thing is burning, so he wants to put a pot in between to lift it off the fire, basically to make something that's called for cotton. So Mechaber says there, you have to be careful not to put it on the karka. What do you have to be careful? We're talking about here the person's das to put it back. So it's clear in the Mechaber that everything is totally on one thing. If you put it on the karka, not. If you put it on the karka, I don't care if it's idol achsa. If you didn't put it on the karka, I don't care if it's ain't idol achsa. That's the shita of the Rambam and shita Mechaber. According to Svardim, as long as you didn't put on the karka, even if it's ain't idol achsa, there's no problem. Then we have the shita of the Sefer Truman and the Beis Maimonid that they hold that as long as you have a kiyum of one of the trying, that's good enough. That means either it's idol achsa, that's enough, even if you put on the karka, or if it was biyadai, even if it was ain't idol achsa. The Beis Yosef says Rabbi Shimon holds not like that. Really, he holds that shita is non-existent. There's a third shita, the shita of the Rif and the Rosh, and then Machma they hold you need both time. It has to be biyadai, and it has to be daito lachsa. It's interesting. The Ran says, what's the plan of the Rif? Shal Rabbanon, why should we so be machmir? So he says, since these things are called lovadeis deraisa, he means is because he sounds like he's going more with mechs and vashal, but it looks like bishul. So even though it's not shal deraisa, but certain takonos chazal, since it's a gzeira, other people are going to perceive this as bishul, so therefore they were more machmir. Not only that, the Rif and the Rosh, not only how they need both Troim, they were machman all the Sveikas and Gemara. That means it's not enough to put it al sapsa with Aitalach. So it has to be in your hand al Aitalach. That's the third shita. And the Torah and the Ramah passed in this way that in order to put it back, it has to be Oide Biyodoi and Aitalach. So the Ramah is very machman. So it comes out, we have three shitas here. Let's get it clear again. We have the shita of the Rambam. The Rambam holds that we go with all the Shabbos Gemara Lekula, and we pass like the Lashon that everything is totally on karka. If you put on the karka, even if it's daita lachsa, it doesn't help. That's Mefurshim Mechaber Sev Gimel. If you didn't put on the karka, even if it's ain't daita lachsa, that's going to be good like the Rambam. Can forward Sev base. That's the shita of the Mechaber. The shita of the Rosh, the Rif, and that's the way the Ramah passes. You have to have daita lachser and oidibiyodoi and all the Shabbos and Gemara, all the Chumrah, which means you have to hold it in your hand. It's not enough to put it on the sapsel, and it has to be daita lachser, and that's the shita of the Ramah. And then we have the shita of the Hagoyis Maimoni and the others that they hold as long as you have one, that's good. Sabado, there's no question about it. That if someone wants to take something off the fire Friday night, some people like to take chon Friday night, if someone wants to take the soup and saving it for someone else, you want to put it back. So you have to be careful to have a kiyum of all the tanoim, which means it has to be aleph gar for kotum, which means you have to have a lech. Second, it has to be oide biyodoi, and it has to be daitoi lachs. The shaila is this all lechatchila. What about b'diavad? It happens that by mistake someone took it off and put it down. Or, let's say he took it off, he's still holding it, but he didn't realize that someone else wants the soup. So when he took it off, it was a das, not to put it back. So Mitchell will talk about maybe a different share, what happens if you weren't a balabos, so maybe your das is not a kaveya. So that's a different shmuz. Let's talk about in an amala case. The question is there any mokum to mekel when you're missing any of these troyim, according to the shita of the Ramah? So the Bialocha has a bigger riches about this, and the Bialocha comes out over there that comes out, and the Mishnah Berurah a little bit more matamtzimit, but the basic idea of the Mishnah Berurah and the Halacha is that he's willing to make it when I have tutzer roof. That means even though the Rif and the Rosh hold you have to have dafka two Tanoim, oide biyodoi, and aitalach. So if you're willing to make it when you have the sheet of the Rambam together with the Goyis Maimon. Again, the Goyis Maimon holds you have to have one Tanoim. Rambam holds everything's totally agabe karka. So about if you put on the karka and it's aitalach, it's not going to help, even though the Goyis Maimon is going to help. But the Mechaber clearly paskins that it doesn't help. Sif Gimel can't go connect the Mechaber. If it's aitalach and you didn't put on gabe karka, so here according to Rambam it's good because he holds everything stolen gabe karka. According to Goyis Maimon it's good. So that the Mishnah Berurah is willing to make. Or then if you put on the sapsel and it was aitalach, that would be good enough. So what comes out in the Mishnah Berurah is that the Mishnah Berurah is makel. Either it was oide biyodoi and it wasn't aitalach, or you put on the sapsel and it was aitalach. But if you put on the karka and it was aitalach, even though the Goyis Maimon is, you could be makel, the Mishnah Berurah is not willing to make it even to the Evan negative Mechaber. That's the Mishnah Berurah's take. The Chazon Ish says, 1 second, we have here, Bemis is a Ramah. The Ramah brings down the sheet of the Ram. The Ram sheet is, all the Tanoi CHAZARA that we have in the Gemara, all talking about when you took something off the fire Shabbos and you put it back on Shabbos. So there, when Shabbos comes, we see the disconnect from what happened before Shabbos. So then you have to have the Tanoi CHAZARA to see the Hemshech HaBishul. But if you took something off on Shabbos and you took it off and you put it on the ground, and it was not aitalach, so the Ran holds you allowed to put it back. Because then, since it was on the fire at the beginning of Shabbos, we do not say that it's botlo shia akadems. And the Ramah brings down the shita of the Ran. He says, "V'yeshem chosman chosa eina osra action to makim by join le'chzira at shechashecha. Aval lochem yishram shechashecha pil yichav gabe karkas mutter." So it seems to be that the Ramah is makel on that. Shaul says, even if it wasn't aitalach, so we have a sheet of the Ramah. So l'chayra, once we have a Ramah that's makel, even though the Ramah says not so partial, but it does bring down, there's a sheet of the Ran. So there would be a stark amokin to makel with the Eved upon if someone put on a gabe karka, even if it was ain't aitalach. Bemis is there are the Tal, we told the Shaul and others that taka want to be makel with the Eved. I mean, someone might have a mistake, whatever it is the situation was, they put on a gabe karka and it was not aitalach, so still you could put it back to the same as the Eved on the shita of the Ran. So the Chazon has his own, you have the Ran. So he says that even maybe the Ramah is makel. The most talk about the case you put on the karka and you had das to put it back. So he wants to say that maybe the Ramah was only makel when you put on the karka. It's here of two things: the Ran together with the Goyis Maimon. That if you have one side, you could make it. That means Avada is not being choishish for the Rambam that holds that if nicha bekarka is a problem. But since you have the Ran, it's serious. The Goyis Maimon that holds as long as you have one tie is enough. So you could be makel. So maybe the Chazon says that even if you put a gabe karka, but it was aitalach, so he says as you could be makel.
Using the Ramah.
That's the Chazon is clarifying that even the Ramah, since the Ramah spoke about such a case, it's possible that the Ramah saying the meaning was only as a vite, and the pshat in the Ramah is because it's based on he's only makel but see if when you have a Goyis Maimon. But if you put on the karka and you didn't have a mind to put it back, so then it's just straight around that he's not willing to make. Now Bemis says it's a pella on the Bialocha. The Bialocha has a bigger riches here to try to see what you could do with the Yed. And he says that even though the Beis Yosef says that a Goyis Maimon is a das yochid, but he holds Maisi has many Rishonim like that. So he's willing to make it when you have a tzir of the Goyis Maimon together with Rambam, but less than that not. He pulled out whatever you could pull out. It's a pella, but he forgot the Ran. The Ramah brings the Ran a little bit further. Why does he be mitzaref the Ran? So the Chazon Ish asked this kasha on the Bialocha. Why does he bring this Ran?
The Berurah himself answers it. He said that nobody passes like the Ran.
No one paskins like the Ran. That's true.
Himself, the Berurah says it himself.
Abadi says we don't paskin like the Ran. But the problem with that is Abadi we don't paskin like the Ran. But let me tell you something. We don't paskin like the Goyis Maimon either. we don't pass like the Rambam either. There are more passages like the Shita of the Rif and the Rosh.
But he calls it a das Yichidah.
But the Hagoyis Rambam is also das Yichidah, the Beis Yosef says. So l'chol ha'pochis, to be a locha, is trying to make tziruf. We should make that tziruf. So some people want to say, I asked this question. I give bechinnus. So I asked this question. So people say, to be a locha is talking about a case where you took it off before Shabbos and you put it back on Shabbos. Some people want to say that. I said, I'm not willing to accept that. The Bialoch is going through very shaloike darkoi. The reason why he's Bimayruch over here is because it's taka shchichtige shayla, and he's going through all the cases that you can make. He's trying to push out this case, what you could do. He's very clear what he's willing to make, which he lines up all the sheetas. It's a mamash appella why the Mishnah Berurah. It sounds to be that the Mishnah Berurah holds the mice of the ran is kilo, even the Ram reads it down, it's kilo off the page. Can't be saying you're right, but it's a very fair thing to understand. Upon him, what comes out, let's make a sikkum of what comes out is like this. If it's oida biyodai and it's ein dai dolachser, so that's l'kuli alma, the evidence you can make. Because here we have the Rambam, that holds long in upon kak. We have the Beis Maimonides, as long as you have one. If you put on the Abi Safsol and it's dai dolachser, also you have both of these tzuruf. Because again, you have the Rambam and you have the Beis Maimonides. Because you have one at a time. If you put on the sapsel and it was ain't dai delachser, so here the Mishnah Berurah Lemais doesn't want to be mekel because the Beis Maimonides himself holds that you have to have one of the time, and Agabi sapsel like him is not enough because you also have to wait to be other. Even though like the chaber like the Rambam is good, Mishnah Berurah is not willing to mekel. But the Chazon Ish is more that he's mekel. Because he says, even though you write on the sapsel and so you do not have the tziruf of the Beis Maimonides, but you still have the tziruf of the shita of the ran. What happens if you put on the karka and your das was to machsa? That again, Mishnah Berurah says we can't be mekel. Why? Because even though I have the Beis Maimonides, but I don't have the Rambam. He's not willing to make a connect the Rambam. The ran, he holds you can't be saying the Chazon Ish says the then you could be mekel. If you put on the karka, but it wasn't like lachs and make it then you should make it. You got to fear zois Chazon Ish lamaisa you should machmir, like what the Mishnah Berurah holds. But that's only been again if you put on the karka and dai lachs. But if you put it on the safsel and it's ain't dai lachs, that it seems to be that he's willing to make it. What happens if you put on the karka and it's ain't dai lachs? That even the Chazon Ish holds it can be make because he says the Ramah that's mekel, but the ran. Even the Ramah himself maybe was only mekel when it was B'tzir of Beis Maimonides, which means that it was B'tzir for Beis Maimonides, which means that Chopach was daitoi lachsa. Like I mentioned before, there are Achronim, there's a Tal who told the Shmuel that wanted to make it in such a case, but we have seems to be that as I write, it's a very shred. So upon him, what comes out is Ladina. If you put on the karka and ain't daitoi lachsa, that you can't be mekel. If it's al gabi karka and it's dai delachser, Chazon Ish says he should machmir, but he leaves you room to be saimach. I guess it depends on the situation. If there's a more of a mokum to mekel, there's a mokum to mekel to be saimach Chazon Ish b'shas atchak, especially if it was al gabi safsel. So that the Mishnah Berurah himself says that you can mekel. Now, most cases when it comes to Maisa, there are other tzirufim that Shemek will speak about. There's a big question. No one's putting a pot on the floor. Never heard of such a thing. So what do people do? They take a pot and they put it on a counter. So Mitchell will talk about it. How do we look at a counter? Is a counter a sapsel or a counter is a floor? If a counter is the floor and you put it down there, say nechanam, so that the Chazon Ish doesn't want to be mekel l'maisa, even if it's dai telachs, and Shabu for sure is not mekel. But if you tell me counter is like a sapsel, so then there's a mocker to make it. So Mr. Maybe we'll get back to this when we learn that in here. So that's what comes out. Oh. Now another very important nekuda is like this. The Mechaber brings down Siv Beis that you're allowed to put it back. Calls my answer is Resachas. Now what's this tonight that has to be Resachas? So Kipshutoi, reason why it has to be Resachas is the same reason we said it has to be fully cooked. It's not fully cooked. There's a question of bishul. It's not a Shiloh CHAZARA, it's a Shiloh bishul. That's the chayr of Porsche Pshat over here. If it's not Resachas, then it's a problem of bishul. And the Beis Yosef says lahedrin that it has to be Resachas, otherwise it's bishul. That means it comes out, it's not mitnoi chazara. And Mr. Bura and Sifkot and Dalad read Zuch Lahedya. Even though that has to be Oidibiyadoi, that it has to be Daitalach, so that has to be mitnoi chazara. Because otherwise, we do not see the hemshech of the previous bishul. But when this thing that has to be hot, that's his reason. But the Mogen Avram in Sifkot Lamed Vav runs up in the Ramah, and he says that no, that's a Tanai Chazor. There's a Tanai Chazor that has to be hot. The Goy, Lahedi argues, and he says no, it's not a Tanai Chazor. It's only like the Beis Yosef says, because otherwise it'll be a Shaila Bishul. So happens to be as a shtickle. Stephen the Mogen Avram Sifkot Yutes is in word that there is Mitzad Bishul. So we're not going to get into that. There's a big challenge. The Chayim had to for that. But what's the nafkamina? It's a big nafkamina. Let's say you have a double lach. So if it's a double lach and it got cold, then there's a problem of bishul. So it's not going to get us all machlekes. What's nafkamina if I can't put it back because of bishul? I can't put it back because of chazor. What happens if you have a double yavish? Let's say, for example, someone took off a baked chicken or challah. Whatever the hechatimtza was, something was on the fire. Kugel, something was on the fire. Auction kugel, and now you took it off, and it's garfa cotton, and the question is, but it got cold. Could you put it back? It was like to be yodoi. Could you put it back? So according to the Mogen Avram, no, it got cold. The fact that it got cold, that itself makes it that it's batal shia kedemts. Hashem came. The goyim holds that no, it's only because of bishul. It's no problem. Bishul, I don't care if it got cold. The halacha, the Shulchan HaRav passes like the Mogen Avram, Kedarke, the Chomokim. Mr. Bura seems to be that he holds you can make it, even though the halacha. He brings one place to Mogen Avram, but seems to be the ikashita of the Mr. Bura is le halkubaseh. Got a Ramesh in the Trubis. He says that you should machmir like the shita of the Mogen Avram, which will come out of the Yovish that Winastanan would be a problem. And but it's not so negate. We're talking about lachatchila. Anyways, it has to be oide biyadoi and daitalachsim. How long could a person hold something till it cool down? It's very not shchiach that he's holding on something and holding a kugel or another dav yovish and the mamish got cool. It's very not shchiach. Where it could be negated, shaila is on a case of b'di'evet, let's say you put it down on the counter. Let's say we're going to consider a counter. A sapsel, and it was daitalachsa. Oh, so here can be negate. Mr. Bura says, let's say a counter is sapsel. Let's name that on. So if it's a counter of sapsel, so now Mr. Bura paskins, b'di'evet, like upon him, if you put on the sapsel with daitalachsa, it's going to be good. So now you put down the kugel on the counter, they didn't realize, and it was daitalachsa. So according to Mr. Bura, call up the rabbi, you go to the rabbi, the rabbi says, yeah, you can put it back. Tell the rabbi 1 second. He was sitting there half an hour, already got cold. So according to Mishnah Bura, you could be makel. According to Shulchan HaRav, you can't be makel. The Moshe's machmer. But for Shteitzach, Mishnah Bura is makel. So if it's a shaila of a big shas atchak, whatever the situation would be, that it would be important that it should be warm, then there would be a mokum to makel. Now, many times there's a simple answer. You could warm it up other ways, which we'll see. If Gimel, you can always put on top of a Kedem Malay, especially something else you don't have it. Upon him. So what comes out is that what's clear is that from the Troim Chazara, in order to be able to keep up the original bishul, it has to be Oide Biyodoi and has to be Daitalachs. But this that the Mechaber says that it has to be hot, there's a machlekes how to understand this din. Is that because otherwise there'll be a Shaila bishul, which that only be Kedover Lach, there's no problem. Or the shad is because if it's hot, we see the connection of the original bishul. If it's cold, it's batal shia kademesh. Just like you put them like a karka, it's batal. Just like if it's not, daitalachs is batal. Or then if it's cold, it's batal. That's a machlekes to Mogen Avram, and the Kohen had a learn pshat in this halacha v'sachas, and the Mishnah Bura seems to be makel in the shaila, and the Shulchan HaRav and Ramosha seem to be machmir. So, like I said, in a normal situation, it's not really negate because it was daitalachs and you're holding it in your hand, it's not getting cold. It would be in a case of b'di'evet that we said, let's say you can decide if it's safsel and daitalachs, then it could be left on a safsel for a long time. If we don't have so much of a safsel, but the shad would be negate if you put it, like I said, on the counter, if we consider counter like a safsel, which Mitchell will speak about. Now, one more shaila that's very important is like this. One of the Torah CHAZARA has to be oide biyada. Now, what does it mean oide biyada? Oide biyada means it has to be physically in your hand. It means in mid-air, or as long as you're holding it. It's a big nafkamina. What happens if, let's say, I want to put it down? Sometimes you have a pot. Sometimes very hard to hold. So in the air, especially if one person, you have to hold it and take food out of it. You can't do that. It's a very small pot. You can do that, but most of the times, one person is very hard to do that. So the question is it enough to hold it? That means you take the pot off the fire, you're holding it. One hand, you're holding the pot on the counter, and with the other hand, you're taking the food out. So if you have two people there, it's very easy. Sometimes, whatever the situation is, you don't have two people. The question is, when we talk about oide biyada, does it mean oide biyada in the air? Or oide biyada means that you're holding it, afuke, you're leaving go of it. So Loshen Ram Pisha Mishnayis is clear that it has to be ba'afi. Would seem that oide biyada means mamash in your hand, but there's a Yishalmi that says a Loshen v'lei hiver yada mimenu. It's mashma that as long as you're holding on to it, it's good enough. So Moshe is true about the Shaila, and Moshe says that even though the Rambam in Pisha Mishnayis says it has to be in the ear, but the Rambam in Yad leaves that out, and it's mashma from him that as long as you're holding on to it, it would be good, like a state in Yishalmi. And there's always four payments in Torah Shabbos. Torah Shabbos is the Zayda, the Zayda of the Korban Sanal, Friedika. He also says before you could be Mekel, Frida Yishalmi. There is a Truvas Ram Sheikh that also brings this Yishalmi, and he's V'dayak Yishalmi is only talking about Kanichas Agabe Safsa. That means if you put it down on the karka, about a second help holding on to it. When it's Safsa, which is a Shaila Gemara, on that it's going to help holding it. So if your old count is considered like a safsel, so then count would have the same halacha. But you wouldn't be able to do that. Moshe holds that no, it helps no matter where. Then there's a shita goyin. Goyin is a whole different mahalach in the Yishalmi. I'm not going to go into his mahalach, but according to his Yishalmi, comes out there's no more korban chlal. There's svara that if you're holding on to it, it's enough, and about it has to be in the ear. And that's what Yasha Paskins, he went with the goyin. That the Yishalmi is a different Shani. Yishalmi and Mela Abadi you have to be holding in the air. So what comes out, the Maisa is we have three Shitas here. According to the Shita of Ramosha, as long as you're holding on to it, even if it's not in the air, that means I'm holding on to it when it's on the counter floor, I don't care where.
Even the ground.
Even the ground, it's going to be good enough. As long as I didn't release, like Loshni Yishalmi, Loi Hiva Yodim Men. According to the Ram Shik, that's only a heter if it's on something that's the din of a safsel. Safsel in between, so then since you're still connected to it, we don't see spot Shia Kadem. That's the sheet of the Ram Shik. And the sheet of the Goyin is that there's no such heter, it has to be Avin, that's the way of the Ashiv went. Takaponim, so that's Nafkamina. So according to Maisha. So Maisa, if someone's in the house themselves and it's a big Shabbos Chak, a lot of times they get, ladies that the husband's not home for Shabbos and they don't have all the kids. And they have to take off the pat and they want to put it back for later on, or Rahman's telling you have an amana or gusha, and there's no one else to help her. And Maisa is a big shazal chak. So what are you supposed to do? So then Abadi Kipisemich or Moshe says that as long as you're holding it, that's good enough. B'frat, he said the Ram Shik sheet is that a safsel, it helps if you're holding on to it. So it could be a counter we'll speak about has a din of safsel. But emes, really, there's another eitzah that sometimes you could use. The eitzah is that it was gebracht in the Paiskim, and Rabbi Asher says this eitzah that if part of it is ba'avid, that's good enough. That means, let's say you take the pat, let's say you put down the pat on the counter, and part of the pat is hanging off the side of the counter. So basically, you're leaving it on the counter to give it support, that it shouldn't fall down, but it's in the air. Together, the way I was makabel was together is that if you would drop it, if you would take off your hand, then it would fall down. So if it wouldn't fall down, basically means that it's being supported by the counter. But if it would fall down, means that you're the one that your hand is supporting it, then it's cool that it's ba'afit. So that is an eitzah. Now depends on the person. Not for every single person, this eitzah is going to work. But that would be an eitzah. I got heard from Rav Felder, told me that when he was a Lakewood, this was Tama Maisa, maybe 40, 50 years ago, He said there was Friday night. The Lakewood used to have these big. They still have these huge pots of shalom. So Bochum wanted to take shalom Friday night. Ignatimus to make a couple pots of Friday night. But those days they had one pot they had Friday night, and then there was going to be Shabbos day. So Zabocha took it out and put it down on the counter or on the oven, wherever it was, and leaned it over. And he wasn't sure if he leaned it over enough that it would fall. So he decided he'll move away his hand and see if it's going to fall. Taki took it off enough, and Taki fell down, and that was under the challenge for that Shabbos. But so if someone does have the eitzah, they could hold it on the end of the counter. That could be the best eitzah. But if someone's in a situation that's stuck that you can't, then about it you could be semich on Ramosha, that as long as you're holding it with your hand, you're not releasing your hand from it, that would be good. So let's make a sikum of what came out today, that even though there's a heter to have CHAZARA, that means something has to be in a certain time that you have to have. The first thing is, like we spoke about last week, it has to be Gorfa Kotim. It's not Gorfa Kotim, then you have to, it's a CHAZARA, which means there's a problem Mechsek Vashal, the way the Mishabur goes Allah, or the problem is out Shashchit, the way the Magarom and Chazanish goes. But besides that, you have to have Troi CHAZARA, because if you don't have CHAZARA, then we don't see the Hemshech of the original Bishul, but we see it's going to still like a Nesin Lechatchila. And what's the Issa of Nesin Lechatchila? If the Issa CHAZARA is Mechsek and Vashal, and Nesin Lechatchila is a bigger Mechsek and Vashal, it's not going to help Gorfa Kotim. If the Issa of CHAZARA is Chash Chitui, then saying Nesin Lechatchila is a Mechsek and Vashal. But the problem holds that both Chash Chitui, but it's a bigger Chash Chitui when you're putting it on Lechatchila. What are Tnei CHAZARA? You have to have Oid B'Yodoi and Daitoi Lachso. We mentioned there's three shitas, La'alocha, in the Poskim. The shita of the Rambam and the Mechaber is that if it's, as long as it's not Agabe Karka, that's good enough. If you put it on Agabe Karka, it's a problem, even Daitoi Lachso. If you didn't put on the Karka, even if it's Daitoi Lachso, that's good. According to the shita of the Ramah, Halacha is that you have to have both one, Daitoi Lachso and Oidoi B'Yodoi. We said the Mishnah Berurah Halacha L'Maisa says that you can make it whenever you have the tzir for the Rambam Legois Maimis, which means if it was Oida B'Yoda, Ein Daitoi Lachso, or Safsel and Daitoi Lachso, that would be good enough. But Agabe Karka, even Daitoi Lachso, you wouldn't be able to make it. Chaznish says that even my Safsel Ein Daitoi Lachso, Agabe Karka, the Daitoi Lachso, he declares that maybe you would be able to make it. That says L'Maisa you didn't want to make it, but yeah, because then you can make it with tzir. The sheet of the ground. We said there are others that are makel even you put Agabe Karka and Daitoi Lachso, that's a shrer tzad. So La'alocha, even though Lechatchila you have to have Oida B'Yoda and Daitoi Lachso, but with the Yevet, as long as it's in your hand, even though it's ain't Daitoi Lachso, even if it's Sanich Agabe Safsel, Daitoi Lachso, you will be able to put it back. We spoke about the dinner of Sachas, that's Tanai CHAZARA, that's the Bir Sachas, or it's only because there shouldn't be a problem of Bishul. And said some machlokes halacha between the Mishnah Berurah and the Shulchan HaRav and Moshe is machman the shayla, but we said if there's a sorich, you'll be able to make it. Nafkin is by Davi Yovish. Then we spoke about what does it mean? Oid B'Yoda. Does Oid B'Yoda mean that's physically held by your hand? That means it's avir, or means that you're gripping onto it. According to Ramosha, based on the Yishami, as long as you're gripping onto it, even on the kak, it's good. According to Ramshik, as long as it's on the safsel, it's good. And according to the Goin, the Asher went that way. It has to be in the Ave Mamish. And we said that about the Lachatchila person, the best thing is if you don't have someone to help you, you should lean over the counter in a way that if you leave your grip, it would fall down, and that's considered that it's Avir. But if you don't have the Reitzah, then you can rather keep the same Chamoisha and hold it. So the Kitzel comes out to the Tnei CHAZARA, once heard of Siman, Batchi. Batchi means like a bathroom, happy. In order for a person to be happy that he'll get whatever he needs for Shabbos, has to be beis. Beis is blech. It has to be Gorfa Kotim. Dalid is Daitoi Lachso. Ches it has to be Batchi is ches. It has to be no. Beis is 1 second. Beis was blech. Dalid was Daitoi Lachso. Ches was cham. Cham has to be cham. And Yud, it should be Yodor, Yad. Okay, so that's about what has to be done. Easy way to remember is Batchi. But if someone didn't do Batchi and it's a child that he should be Otziv, she'll ask the local Orthodox rabbi what you could do, but we gave the basic column over here. Okay.